The woman in seat 14C didn't even look up when Thea walked past. That was the thing nobody talked about afterward. Not the coffee, not the lawsuit, not the photograph that ended up in 3 different newspapers. Nobody talked about how it started with something so small. A glance withheld, a chin tilted away, the particular way certain people look right through you, like your furniture, like your weather. Thea noticed. She always noticed. But she had learned, a long time ago, that noticing and reacting were 2 very different choices. She settled into her window seat, tucked her carry-on into the overhead bin, and pulled out the folder she'd been meaning to read since Monday. Outside the small oval window, the tarmac at Vancouver International stretched flat and gray in the November drizzle. A baggage cart trundled past. Somewhere beneath her, the plane groaned through its pre-flight checks. The woman in 14C, the one who hadn't looked up, was named Donna. She was 43 years old, had worked for Northern Cascade Airlines for 11 years, and considered herself, by her own reckoning, one of the best flight attendants in the business. She had the posture for it, the smile for it, the voice that could project warmth across a crowded cabin without ever quite reaching her eyes. She knew the difference between a passenger who mattered and a passenger who thought they mattered. She prided herself on this distinction. Thea, in Donna's assessment, did not matter. She had formed this opinion somewhere between gate check and boarding, around the time Thea had handed over her boarding pass, wearing a cream-colored fleece, dark jeans, worn-in boots that had seen better winters, and no jewelry to speak of. First class, Donna had thought, reading the seat assignment, and then she'd looked at Thea, really looked, the way she did, the quiet inventory she ran on every passenger, and something in her had curled. Business travelers wore suits. Executives wore watches you could see from 10 feet away. This woman, this young woman with her simple ponytail and her canvas tote bag, had no right to the seat she was sitting in. Of course, she never would have said any of that. Donna was a professional. The flight to Toronto was 4 hours and 40 minutes. Thea had 3 reports to read, 2 calls to return once they landed, and a dinner she was already dreading with a board member who liked to talk more than he listened. She was not thinking about Donna. She was not thinking about much except the clause on page 7 of the acquisition document that didn't sit right with her. About 40 minutes into the flight, the drink cart came down the aisle. "Coffee?" Donna asked the man in 13A, who was asleep against the window. She moved on. "Coffee?" to the couple in 13B and C, who both said yes, thank you, with the ease of people who'd this 1,000 times. She poured with a kind of practiced efficiency, barely looking at her hands. Then she reached Thea's row. Thea glanced up from her folder. "Coffee, please. Black?" Donna smiled. It was the smile she gave people when she'd already decided. She lifted the pot and began to pour, and then she simply didn't stop. The cup filled and kept filling, and the coffee crested over the rim and flooded across Thea's tray table and directly onto the folder in her lap, soaking through the pages she'd marked, bleeding through the acquisition documents, and continuing down in a dark, scalding river onto her thighs. Thea sucked in a breath. The heat was immediate and serious. "Oh," Donna said, a sound like surprise, though her face didn't quite match it. "I'm so sorry I didn't." And then she laughed. It was brief and she covered it quickly with a professional cough, but the woman across the aisle heard it. The man behind Thea heard it. Thea heard it. A small sound, barely a second long, but it had a texture to it. Something satisfied. Something amused. Like a person who had knocked something over on purpose and found it funnier than expected. Thea set the folder down on the seat beside her, carefully, as though it were something breakable. She pressed her palms flat against the tray table. The coffee was still hot enough that she could feel it through her jeans. She said nothing. This seemed to confuse Donna more than any response would have. She blinked. She held out a single cocktail napkin, one small square of paper, and set it on the edge of the tray table. "I'll get you another," she said, meaning the coffee, and moved the cart forward. The woman across the aisle, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, leaned slightly toward Thea. Her name tag said Patrice. She was the other cabin attendant working first class that afternoon, and she had been watching the entire exchange from the galley doorway. "I'm so sorry," Patrice said quietly, appearing at Thea's elbow with a real stack of napkins and a calm, steady expression. "Let me get you something. Club soda?" A warm cloth? There are clean blankets in the overhead if you want to. Thank you, Thea said. Her voice was even. Warm cloth would be great. Patrice went to get it without being asked twice. Thea looked down at the folder in her lap. The top 3 pages were destroyed. The acquisition figures were still legible. She'd read them enough times that they lived in her head by now. She didn't need the paper. But the notes she'd handwritten in the margins, the ones from Tuesday's call with the legal team, those were gone, blurred into brown water. She folded the ruined pages and slid them into the seat pocket. She picked up her phone and opened her notes app and began, from memory, to rewrite them. This was, by any measure, the least interesting thing happening in row 14. But it was the thing Thea focused on, because there was work to do, and there would be time for everything else later. Patrice came back with a warm cloth and a genuine apology, and a quiet, careful anger behind her eyes that she kept very professionally controlled. She helped Thea clean up without fuss, without performance, without making it into more of a scene than it already was. "Can I bring you a fresh coffee?" Patrice asked, "and, honestly, anything else you want. I'm very sorry for what just happened." Thea looked at her. "One thing," she said. "What's your name?" "Patrice Okafor." Thea nodded slowly, the way people do when they're filing something away. "Thank you, Patrice." Patrice went back to the galley. Behind the curtain, she found Donna refilling the coffee pot, humming very faintly under her breath. "You need to go out there and apologize," Patrice said. Donna glanced over her shoulder. "I did apologize, a real one. It was an accident." Patrice looked at her for a long moment. "Donna, you kept pouring." A silence stretched between them. Donna set the coffee pot down. "She's fine," Donna said. "Her clothes are fine. She's in first class, she can. Go apologize." Donna smoothed the front of her uniform jacket and walked back out into the cabin. The apology she delivered to Thea was technically correct, in the same way a press release is technically correct. Every word chose carefully for what it didn't say. Donna was sorry for the inconvenience. These things happened. She hoped Thea was comfortable. She'd be happy to assist with anything Thea needed for the remainder of the flight. Thea listened, nodded once, said, "Thank you." Donna went away. The rest of the flight passed without incident. Patrice brought Thea a proper coffee and a warm cookie, and a small bottle of still water that hadn't been requested, but was placed beside her tray table without comment. Thea read and wrote, and looked out the window at the cloud cover over the Rockies, and did not appear to anyone watching to be a person who had been treated badly. She had an expression that some people read as blankness and other people, the ones who knew what they were looking at, recognized as something else entirely. Patience. The particular kind of patience that comes from knowing something the other person doesn't. The plane landed at Pearson just after 6 in the evening. The clouds over Toronto were the same color as the ones over Vancouver. Thea collected her carry-on, straightened her ruined jeans, and filed off the plane with the rest of first class. In the jet bridge, Patrice was stationed at the door saying goodbyes. Thea paused. "I have a question for you," she said. Patrice looked at her steadily. "Of course. How long have you been with Northern Cascade?" 8 years. Thea nodded. "Do you like it?" Patrice considered this honestly, which Thea appreciated. "I love the work," she said. "I love the flying. I love the passengers." She paused. Most of them. Something shifted slightly in Thea's expression. Not a smile exactly, but close. "Good answer," she said. "Enjoy your evening." She walked up the jet bridge. At the gate she stopped for exactly 30 seconds. She took out her phone. She opened her contacts, scrolled to a number that most people would not have had, and placed a call. It rang twice. "Thea," said the voice on the other end. "How was Vancouver?" "Fine," she said. "I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "If someone on a Northern Cascade crew behaved in a way that was, let me think about how to put this, deliberate, rather than accidental, toward a passenger in first class, what would the process be?" A pause. "Are we talking about your flight just now?" "Yes. Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Warm coffee, not boiling. My notes for the Meridian deal are gone, but I've reconstructed them." Another pause, longer this time. "Thea, you do understand that you're calling the chairman?" "I know who I'm calling, Gordon." A sound that might have been a laugh and might have been something else. "Tell me what happened," she told him, quickly, without drama, the way she told everyone everything. Direct, precise, no editorializing. She described the coffee. She described the laugh. She described Patrice, including her name, and what Patrice had done, and the way Patrice had looked when she'd said she loved the flying and the passengers. Gordon listened. When she finished, he was quiet for 3 seconds. "I'll make some calls," he said. "I'm not asking for anything punitive," Thea said. "I just want the right people to know. Whatever process exists, that's for your team to decide." "I understand." He paused. "Though I should tell you, the board meeting next month. Your name came up. I know the acquisition is going through. I know that too. A beat. Are you still coming to the dinner on Thursday?" "Regrettably," she said. He laughed then, a real one. "Get some rest, Thea." She hung up and walked toward baggage claim. Her name on the Northern Cascade Board of Directors had been there for just under 2 years. She had joined quietly, the way she did most things, after her firm, Aldercroft Advisory, which she had built from a single rented desk in Calgary at age 26, had restructured the debt arrangement that had, among other things, kept Northern Cascade in the air during a period when several of its competitors had not survived. Her role on the board was non-executive, largely advisory, and she had never once turned up at one of the airline's facilities demanding to be recognized or treated differently, or shown deference she didn't ask for. This was a matter of principle. It was also, she had come to understand, a kind of test, not one she'd designed, but one that life had designed, and that certain people failed regularly. The world was full of Donnas, people who had assigned her a category before she'd opened her mouth, and then organized all their subsequent behavior around defending that assignment. She'd met them in boardrooms and airport lounges and conference calls, and first-class cabin rows, and she had learned that the most useful thing she could do, in almost every case, was exactly what she had done on that flight. Nothing and everything in the correct order. 3 weeks later, Donna received a notice from Northern Cascade's Human Resources Department. It was a formal letter on company letterhead outlining a finding of unprofessional conduct that had been substantiated by 2 independent witness accounts and reviewed by a senior compliance officer. It cited, specifically, the deliberate mishandling of a service interaction and failure to respond appropriately following an incident with a passenger in first class on a Toronto-bound flight on November 14th. Donna was given the opportunity to respond to the finding. She did so in a 4-paragraph letter that spent 3 paragraphs explaining that the coffee had been an accident, and 1 paragraph suggesting that the passenger in question had been difficult. The compliance officer noted the response and forwarded the file. 2 weeks after that, Donna's employment with Northern Cascade Airlines was terminated. She would later describe this, to anyone who would listen, as deeply unfair. She was a professional. She had 11 years. She had performance reviews that were consistently good, except for a few flagged incidents over the years, that she had explained to her managers, and that her managers had accepted, mostly because it was easier. She did not connect any of those earlier incidents to this one. She did not connect any of it to the woman in the cream-colored fleece, sitting in 14A, reading a folder. She did not understand, even at the end, that the woman had not done this to her. The woman had simply made a phone call. Everything else had been accomplished by the accumulated weight of Donna's own choices. Patrice Okafor received a letter of commendation from Northern Cascade's Senior Vice President of Guest Experience. It was a formal letter, but it had been drafted with a specific warmth that letters of commendation do not always have, and it cited by name the quality of her judgment and the genuine care she had demonstrated toward a passenger in a difficult situation. 3 months after the flight, Patrice was offered a role she had applied for twice before and been passed over for twice before. Cabin Crew Development Lead, based in Calgary, a position that involved training new flight attendants, and was considered internally one of the better paths forward for someone with her experience. She took it. On her first day, she stood in front of a room of 18 new hires. Young people with good posture and professional smiles, and a nervousness they were all trying not to show, and she told them something that was not in the training manual. "You will meet every kind of person on every kind of flight," she said. "Some of them will look exactly like what they are. Most of them won't. Your job is not to decide who deserves your care. Your job is to deliver it every time without exception." She paused. "Not because they might turn out to be important, Because you are a professional, and that's what professionals do. She told them this, and she meant it. And in the back of her mind, as she said it, she thought about a woman in a cream-colored fleece, sitting in a window seat with a coffee stain spreading across her lap, who had pressed her palms flat against the tray table and said absolutely nothing, and who had, in saying nothing, changed the course of Patrice's career. In a building on Bay Street in Toronto, 3 months after that November flight, Thea sat at the head of a boardroom table for the Northern Cascade Quarterly Review. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the lake on a clear day. Today the sky was the pale white gray of a Canadian February, and the lake was a darker version of the same color, and the whole city looked like it had been drawn in pencil. Gordon sat across from her. He was 67, had white hair, and the particular straightness of a person who had been in boardrooms for 40 years. And he had, in those 40 years, developed a reliable instinct for the people who belonged in rooms like this, and the people who merely occupied them. He had recognized Thea as belonging within about 8 minutes of meeting her for the first time. That had been 4 years ago. The Meridian acquisition is scheduled to close in April, she said, moving through the agenda. I want to flag that the clause on the aircraft maintenance subcontracting arrangement is still something I'd like legal to revisit before we finalize. The exposure there is, noted, Gordon said. I've already asked Davies to look at it. Thea looked up briefly, a slight raise of one eyebrow. You read my memo, I read your memo. She moved on to the next point. After the meeting, in the corridor outside the boardroom, Gordon stopped her. Patrice Okafor is in Calgary, he said. I know. She seems to be doing well. Thea picked up her coat from where she'd hung it over her chair and slung it over her arm. She was always going to do well, she said. She just needed a reasonable environment. Gordon looked at her for a moment. You know, most people would have made more noise. After the flight, the complaint, the call to me, yes. But most people would have wanted more. A name, a public statement, something they could point to. Thea considered this. The point, she said, was never for her to know who I was. Gordon nodded slowly. The point, Thea continued, pulling on her coat, was for things to be handled correctly. She buttoned the top button and picked up her bag. Get someone to look at that maintenance clause, Gordon. Before April. She walked down the corridor and into the elevator, and the doors closed, and she was gone. In a suburb of Mississauga, in a house that was slightly smaller than the one she'd had the year before, Donna was applying to her 14th job in 2 months. Her references were complicated. Her 11 years counted for something in theory and less in practice, because the circumstances of her departure from Northern Cascade had a way of becoming known, and interviewers had a way of asking about it in the particular careful way that told you they already had a partial answer. She had not, in those 2 months, connected the November flight to the woman in the cream-colored fleece. She had connected it to bad luck, to politics, to a system that didn't protect its workers the way it should, to a passenger who had probably complained to someone, some executive, some connection, and gotten her way because that was how the world worked for people like that. She had not asked herself what kind of person she had assumed people like that to be, or why. She had not asked herself many things that, had she asked them, might have changed the shape of the next several years of her life. The coffee stain, if anyone wondered, had been handled by the dry cleaners at the Fairmont near Pearson, where Thea stayed on her Toronto trips. It had come out almost completely. There was a faint shadow, barely visible in direct light, that the dry cleaner had apologized for. Thea had told them it was perfectly fine. She had tipped generously, picked up the fleece, and worn it to a meeting the following morning, where 6 people sat across from her not knowing, or caring, that her collar had a ghost of a coffee stain half an inch below the left lapel. The meeting had gone well. It almost always did.